Disaster management, a topic from lesson 9, environmental management. Now, a disaster is a big harm or an event that takes place which causes a lot of problems to everyone in the environment. And managing that and trying to reduce the harmful effects of that big event is called disaster management. What are the types of disasters? There are two main types of disasters called natural disasters and man-made disasters. As the name suggests, a natural disaster is one that takes place in nature, and examples are earthquakes, floods, lightning, the problems caused due to lightning, volcanic eruptions, a tsunami. And on the other hand, man-made disasters are stampedes. Stampedes are when people push one another and lives are lost because of a crowd of people gathering together and trying to go into a small area. Bomb blasts, riots, chemical accidents, etc. What is disaster management? Now, we have the National Disaster Management Authority of India, who works in coordination with state governments for disaster management. Disaster management is the action or actions implemented through proper planning, organized activity, and coordination. It includes the following, and to have disaster management, there are many committees and many groups and huge number of people and resources that are employed. Now, disaster management includes the prevention of losses and danger. As far as possible, they will reduce the loss to life and humans, of humans and animals, okay, and lessen the danger to life and property. Now, disaster management improves tolerance in the way that they make people aware of what is going to happen, and therefore people, instead of panicking now, are become more tolerant and understand better what to do. They try to provide relief from disaster or minimize the intensity and the extent of the harm. They make people prepared to face the disaster. Okay? Also, they involve themselves with immediate action in the disaster situation and later on assess the damages and the intensity or the severity of the disaster. They also arrange for rescue work and help, and also later, after the disaster has completed its harm on people and the environment, they arrange for rebuilding and rehabilitation. That is bringing people back to some kind of life that they were used to before. Now, as you can see in this chart, that disaster management shows the word preparedness. That means to be prepared, to respond, to recover and help and try to make things as far as possible normal, and mitigation means to reduce the harm that could be caused. Now, whenever there is a disaster, the first thing that has to be thought about is saving lives, giving as much of first aid as possible to the people who are the victims. And for that we have basic principles called the ABC rule, that is airway, breathing and circulation. Now, what is airway? If the victim has difficulty in breathing, the head of the victim should be held in a backward sloping position and the chin should be raised so that his respiratory passage remains open and there is less difficulty in breathing. Second, that is B, stands for breathing. If breathing has stopped, then the victim can be given artificial ventilation by mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, that is blowing air into the victim's respiratory passage. So maybe he will start breathing again. C stands for circulation. If the victim is unconscious, then after trying to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation twice, the heart should be pressed down hard by pressing the chest with both the palms. These actions, both of them, mouth-to-mouth and the CPR or cardiopulmonary resuscitation, should be repeated alternately about 15 times. This may bring the circulation of the person back to normal. Now, there are other situations like bleeding. If the victim is injured and bleeding through the wound, then the wound should be covered with a clean or antiseptic pad, and pressure should be applied on that wound for 5 minutes with either a thumb or the palm of your hand. Now, if the person has got a fracture, any bone is fractured, then it is necessary that the fractured part be immobilized. Immobilized means supported, so that a fracture is a breaking of a bone. So if like in this picture we have the hand broken, there's a fracture. So a support is put there so that the hand doesn't move and it is immobilized. Now during first aid, this can be done with the help of any wooden rod, a baton, a ruler, a piece of wood to support that part. Now if there is an impact on the back or a hit on the back or the vertebral column, the backbone, then the patient should be kept immobile, that is without movement, on a firm stretcher. Now, if the victim has suffered burns, then it is very helpful to hold that injured part under clean and cold flowing water for at least 10 minutes. We have another remedy or a type of first aid to be given in the following situation. Now, as you can see here, R stands for rest, I for ice, C for compression, and 4 for elevation. Now, this rice remedy is used for when you have sprains or twisting of your ankle, your wrist, or contusion. Contusion meaning when you get hurt and you are bruised and a lot of your capillaries get damaged and you are bleeding. So we use the rice remedy, where rest meaning to allow the victim to sit in a relaxed position. Any victim should always be made first to relax. Secondly, apply an ice pack to the injured part. After the ice is applied, that injured part should be massaged very gently. And fourth, that is elevation. Elevation means that the injured part should be kept raised or higher than normal. Now, transportation of victims is very, very important. How we move them from one place to another is of utmost importance, because sometimes the victim gets into more danger when people out of enthusiasm want to help. They don't know how to carry the person and then end up doing more harm than help. So there are various methods of how we should transport victims. Here you can see, when there is a single person, we can use the cradle method. Now this cradle method can be used for light people, women and children, where the person is just carried and supported with both hands. Then we have the human crutch method. If one of the legs is injured, then the victim should be supported with minimum load on the other leg. So he will not use his injured leg, but someone gives him support to use only one leg that is not harmed. Then we love doing piggyback, taking a person on our backs. But this piggyback is different because the person has to support the victim's weight under his thighs. You're putting his arms under the patient's thighs. And if the patient is conscious, he has to clasp his hands and lean forward. Now, the person who is helping should not hold on to the hands of the victim, but keep his hands under the patient's thighs. Another method you can see here where both people interlock their hands and make a four-hand chair and then carry the victim on that four-hand chair. Some other methods are when the patient is injured, instead of lugging him up, you just put your arms underneath his shoulders and drag him to wherever you want to drag him. Or if there are two people to help out, one carries his legs, the other carries under his shoulders and carry him, supporting him properly. Now this is called the pulling or the lifting method. We have another method here where we carry on a two-hand chair, where two hands are used to make the chair and the other two hands of the people who are helping support the patient from behind so that he doesn't fall off. Then you have heard about the stretcher before. Now a stretcher is to completely immobilize. When a patient is very sick, we keep him stiff there, tied to that stretcher. But sometimes we don't have a stretcher, and so we can make this kind of a stretcher which you must have learned when you were doing your scout and guide camps. So this also helps by putting a trouser of a person here. So the base of the trousers gives the support to the injured person. Then we have the firefighter's carry. Now the weight of the patient is supported here on shoulders while holding the patient's thigh and arm. So in this method, not only you take the weight of the patient on the shoulders, but by holding the patient's arm, you are ensuring that the patient's thighs and the patient's arm are also supported and the patient will not fall off. There are other emergency measures, like for example, when there are floods, Kerala is undergoing at the moment a lot of floods, and Mumbai also had floods recently. So sometimes the government or state governments provides these kind of boats to help to evacuate the people in these disasters. But sometimes when these boats are not available, then rafts are made, pieces of wood are tied together, tin and any other substance that can float on water, and this kind of method is called, this kind of a thing is called a raft, which helps the person to escape the disaster called a flood. So another thing is when we have the disaster of fire. So when it's not such a huge fire, a fire extinguisher can be used by, most people know how to use a fire extinguisher, and these fires can be put off and the disaster, a bigger disaster, can be avoided.